The Soul of Black America P1 Culture War. Disclaimer. This post will discuss heavy topics that may invoke uncomfortable feelings. The topic of race and racism, extreme violence, and triggering words will be used. This is for educational purposes. Fact check everything. This post is not made to harass anyone. It is not made to bully anyone. It is not targeting anyone. It is not made to promote hate based on identity, gender, race, religion, or ethnicity, etc. It is the discussion of race and race relations. This is a snowflake disclaimer. I am not discussing any individual. This is an analysis of Black society and issues. If you disagree, please state why or call out anything. This is made to discuss these issues, and hopefully I can learn something new through these exchanges. Racial slurs will be referenced. In this discussion, let's 1. Remember the human. Deconstructing racism and European society can be an intense subject. Remember the human. 2. Behave like you would in real life. 3. Look for the original source of the content, which this is the OG. 4. I have searched for duplicates and I have written it, and if asked, I can provide sources. 5. Be real. Mask off with one another is the only rule of the community. Black America has been whitewashed and fragmentized. Black culture is a corpse that is being cannibalized and sold for consumption, the capitalistic way. There's many different ideologies vying for the soul of Black America. It is a war of representation as those who have been fully integrated and assimilated into white society and who has distanced themselves from the heart of Black America fight to redefine Blackness and commodify it for white audiences' unending desire to consume Black people in the form of Black media. The internal exoticism and demonization of Black people sparks a curiosity to invade and violate Black people through intrusive appropriations. We discuss these voyeuristic tendencies in The White Negro as masquerading, cosplaying, LARPing, and adopting Black culture as a mean to escape white societal expectation, white people fantasy of going native to escape the pressures of white society. It is a reminder, like criminals returning to the scene of a crime, to survey and see if they are attempting Haiti, to remind Black people that if they do, that not all are like that. It is the psychological remnants of an era where this society was able to capitalize off the blood and spirits in Black people. The Black elites are looking to redefine Blackness as they change the narratives and portrayal as Black people who are not like the others. They promote individualism and acceptable Blackness, which is Blackness that is toned down to not cause hysteria in white people. It is the accommodation and whitewashed, sanitized version of Blackness that is cut off from the natural rebellious spirit that our people have always carried. They represent Blackness by making them interchangeably, culturally, with white people and separate from Black culture. We hear the stock arguments all the time. Blackness is not a monolith. Never question someone's Blackness. Rubber band theory applied to race shows that this concept has, like whiteness, been stretched to include cultures that weren't the same ethnicity. There were always two different forms of Black representation in media. As Black America existed separately due to segregation, it developed a culture that also evolved distinctly from the predominant white American culture. It was largely ignored. How Black people were represented in white America is very different than how they were represented in Black America. In white America, Black people were largely dehumanized to play caricatures that played into the imagination of white anxieties and fantasies, the mythos of white supremacy, whereas in Black America, Black people were humanized. Even Black forms of art were eventually consumed and sanitized for white consumption. In the social consciousness of white America, the minstrel show continued, and the many caricatures of these dehumanizing entertainment programs. We will discuss the minstrel show that still plays these same caricatures for a white audience. They look to have the media represent them, but not them. or as Chris Rock put it, niggas versus black people. This is a view that is in pure alignment with the goal of the white liberal ideology of white supremacy, as their views were that white culture is superior, and it is the socio-religious duty of the white man to civilize the savage races. The white man's burden. The black subscribers to this ideological tenet are the Christianized, the assimilated, the integrated, acceptable Black American. This idea actually predates the European concept of race. As one who became a Christian, was seen as white, seen this concept, was interlinked in medieval European societies as purity or innocence. The era of racial occupation that is titled the Civil Rights Era has been whitewashed as the white liberal ideology hijacked the movements to supplant the growing LEPs. There were many different types of ideologies such as Black nationalism movement, Pan-African movement, Black legalism, through the system, Black feminism, and the integrationist movements. They each had different goals and ideologies. The integrationist supporters wanted access to the social mobility promised by an America our ancestors built with their blood, sweat, and tears. Black nationalists advocated for self-reliance, racial pride, and, in some cases, the establishment of separate Black institutions or a Black nation. Black legalism sought to work through the system. The Pan-African movement wanted to unify African people, both on the continent and in the African diaspora, under a common cultural and political identity. The four primary movements sometimes fought and sometimes overlapped, but there were others like grassroots organizations, liberation movements, and Black economic advocacy. There are many, many dividers that currently fragment Black America. It has been intentional. A lot of these dividers attack or undermines the key to empowering Black societies. Strong, Black, family nuclear units. These are concepts that are for the most part manifestations and adoptions from being submerged into the predominant culture and bombarded with the ideology. Racism, both internal and external internalized racism, is the adoption, or internalization, of white supremacy's primary ideological tenet of race theory, racism. Racism, race theory, as a concept, has largely been whitewashed and removed from its historical origins. It replaced racialism and racialist. Racism was, and still is, a European model of thought no different than democracy, capitalism, or socialism, or other ideology that white societies proudly take ownership of. It is a belief system, an ideology, an art, a science, etc. We have discussed this already. The race theory codified the ideological belief that Black people, and non-white in general, are subhuman, cleverly euphemized as beings of an inferior order. Not exactly an animal, but not human like them. They see Black people or others as primal, and see themselves as truly human, or the next stage of human evolution, which in their collective unconscious gives them casus belli to rule over others. Black people adopted this model of thinking over centuries of conditioning via enslavement, neo-slavery, and racial occupation, and white society enforced these ideas through social violence in order to maintain the social order and mythos of white supremacy. The internalization of these ideas would manifest as anti-Blackness in the Black social consciousness, and it has many forms and overlaps with other concepts. We have been misguided to believe that racism is hate, but racism is a worldview that isn't exclusive to feelings of hate or love. It's simply a belief system used to exercise these emotions, regardless of how they manifest. Internalized racism causes a Black person to be anti-Black, whether they are aware of their adoption of race theory or not. They dehumanize other Black people and see themselves as non-human through caricatures invented by white societies. They devalue themselves or feel the need to prove themselves as more than what they are viewed. Internalized racism caused internalized racists to adopt the racial hierarchy even in the Black societies. as Black people discriminated amongst themselves in a caste system that reflected the predominant culture. Colorism, discrimination based on skin color, is a side effect of internalized racism. People wanted to move closer to whiteness, status, and light-skinned Black people were socially valued as being further away from the demonized, dark-skinned complexion. These ideas predate European models of race as well. Culture, greater than, race, sexism, gender war. Black men have historically been emasculated and effeminate, and Black women historically have been forsaken and masculinized. Black people have historically been demonized and infantilized. White society corrupted the religious Christian context. The overlapping conflations of race and gender create complex intersections. In this context, the female gender is often demonized. We will discuss in another post the unique intersection Black women exist within. Sexism is predominantly used to target females, as the female sex is demonized and treated as inferior to the male sex because of traditional beliefs that have roots in religious thought. Black women have seen the continuous worst treatment in human history. This deserves its own article. Black women have been exploited and abused in multiple aspects due to this unique intersection. Especially darker-skinned Black women, feeling the strong effects of racism, colorism, and sexism. Black women were objectified and sexualized, and portrayals of darker-skinned Black women as hypersexual or lascivious has its roots in pre-colonial thought, and we see this in the racist caricature of the Jezebel, which was used as a device in the mythos of white supremacists to justify the disgusting sexual exploitation and commodification of Black women. A lot of Black men would indeed adopt these beliefs and participate in the dehumanization of Black women, and they would also enforce colorist ideas in order to participate in white supremacist ideology. There's many caricatures that were invented to express the view that the WS had about Black women. Black women were views from a range of stereotypes from Jezebel to Mammy. They have evolved and still exist today. Black men underwent an emasculation process where, in the Christian context, they were stripped of their traditional gender role and authority within their households, and in some instances made to appear less threatening and more acceptable by adopting traits stereotypically associated with feminine gender roles. Black males, like Black females, were also subject to sexual exploitation and violence. The lack of ability to provide social protection and security to their wives and children would create complex effects from hypermasculine repressions exercised through many forms of violence and sexism, a need to control. Resentment from both sides would stir due to the intrusive and commodifying presence of white people as they exploited them. The early suffrage movement. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, white women often used the plight of Black women to argue for their own right to vote, but without fully supporting racial equality. White feminists used Black women in their cultural war against white men. Occupiers like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton would employ racist rhetoric to gain support from Southern white women and Southern white men. A lot of civil rights victories would serve to benefit WW specifically against their personal plight against the white male hegemony. Even though they benefited from WS, they wanted to be treated as equal to WM, not to Black people. Emasculation would cause Black men become like white men, as civil liberties were given. I think one great trick of WS is to convince the Black person that if they act a certain way, they can become white, to divest while under the guise of going their own, while forsaking Black women, who were actually a part of the emasculation process. Many looked up and wanted to become or to defile whiteness, and others wise to be left alone. Gender, greater than race, was the divider. We will cover this in greater in another post. Lilypad, The Help. Social mobility, classism, elitism. Classism has always been a primary way for Black people to divide themselves. We have discussed this extensively. The Black elites have always sold out Black America in their attempts to gain representation from WA. They have a quest to become white, or to play their games at the expense of racial unity, to beat the system at its own rules. The access to social mobility and recognition, or representation, is what has stretched the Black community thin. Class divisions amongst Black people have its roots in slavery, neo-slavery, and racial occupation. Even on the plantations, there were distinctions that were created between people who were confined to house slavery and field slavery, which propagated into Black society during racial occupation. Colorism is intertwined in this system, but it was also not exclusively interlinked together. All throughout this time, there did exist free Black people, freed Black people, and free people of color, and ethnicity. The Great Migration saw millions of Black Americans move from the rural South to the urbanized areas of the North, leading to the formation of the Black middle class. This class often sought to distance themselves from the poorer, working-class Black people. They strived for social acceptance and economic advancement. We would see all sorts of communities, cultures arise out of this. As discussed in the Black bourgeoisie, Black America have seen many different socioeconomic dynamics and systems of internal discrimination. Talented 10th concept popularized by Du Bois advocated for Black people to uplift themselves, though education and professional development, even at the expense of broader racial solidarity. Wealthier Black people often adopted values and behaviors that aligned closely with mainstream white American culture. The divider in this instance is of thinking class, greater than race, regional and political ideology. I like to call it white people's problems. It is when the problems present in white American culture seep into Black American culture, or when it is made to seem like it is, when in reality it affects through proximity. I think the adoption and alignment of white political ideologies in the Black social conscious, which could be described via the double consciousness, also described by Du Bois. Some Black people would opt into political factions, seeing it as a means to implement social changes. Others would choose socio-political activism, while others would simply become indifferent. Religion also play a pivotal role in racial occupation, as the influence of Black churches and Black religious leaders varied across the political spectrum. The Black church has been a center for civil rights activism, whereas some conservative Black Christians might align more with socially conservative political agendas. A lot of Black voters would vote against their interest in support of policies that largely had nothing to do with Black America. Even now, during this era of racial occupation, it is merely whitewashed symbolic gestures, while other groups benefit from substantial protective laws, such as the Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill. The divider being regional or political identity, greater than race, religion. There's a church on every block in Black neighborhoods. I will refrain from criticizing the church and Christianity's influence in Black America for now. This portion to only display how religion was and is instrumental in maintaining white supremacy. Religion has long served as a double-edged sword in Black America, functioning both as a unifying force and a dividing line. On one hand, it has provided a sanctuary and a bedrock of cultural identity. The Black Christian Church was a place where the oppressed found hope. Many Christian churches were rallying point for civil rights movements. Yet, beneath this unity, religion also carved divisions amongst the population, delineating lines of belief that can separate as much as they bind. The multiplicity of religious expressions within Black America, from Christianity to Islam, two religions which has historically exploited Black people, from traditional African spiritual practices to newer movements like the Nation of Islam, reflects a rich tradition of faith, of Black people praying to God and remaining hopeful. However, these varied beliefs created rifts, as these were holistic couplings. Denominational differences, doctrinal disputes, and varying degrees of conservatism and progressivism attitudes that the religion fostered all played key roles in placating the Black mind. As these ideas were manifested into the social consciousness, Christianity, forced through threat of violence, unto some black people through slavery has been both a tool of liberation and a means of control. Enslaved people were indoctrinated with a version of Christianity that emphasized obedience and submission via the ethno-Christianity of the white supremacist. Yet many of the hopeful followers reinterpreted the faith to find messages of hope and deliverance. This dual heritage carries forward, where conservative interpretations of Christianity often clash with more liberal or progressive elements within the black community. Even to this day, debates over identities and intersections like LGBTQ+ rights, gender roles, and social justice within church congregations exemplify these underlying tensions. Islam, particularly through the influence of figures like Malcolm X and organizations like the Nation of Islam, offered an alternative to the Christian mainstream, promoting black nationalism. This religious alternative has attracted many who sought a faith that more directly confronted racial occupation. Yet, this too can create divides, as differing interpretations and theologies within the broader Muslim community can sometimes lead to friction. Moreover, a call to traditional African spiritual practices have seen waves of resurgence, as many seek to reconnect with an identity they lost. This reclamation is empowering, but can also create a sense of otherness among those who adhere to more conventional religious practices. The embrace of African spirituality and culture often challenged the hegemony of Western religious traditions, fostering both pride and controversy. Religion in Black America is a microcosm of the broader societal struggle of Black people. In particular, the ethno-Christianity practiced by the white supremacists were adopted or transplanted into the Black Christian psyche as ideas like the curse of Ham, the Jezebel, etc., were caricatured. The white liberal faction of WS held that through the white man's burden, they must civilize the inferior races, whereas the white conservative faction of WS held that the scary black man must be subjugated and kept in line with the threat of violence. We've seen this exercised when the Black Power movements of the 1960s and 1970s challenged the existing LEPS order in the United States. These movements sought to end racial occupation, which threatened the entrenched white power structures. We've seen white liberals hijack the civil rights movement, and we've seen white conservatives decimate Black organizations and communities during the War on Black America, when they funneled drugs into the neighborhoods of Black people and destroyed the family nuclear units, leading to the crack epidemic in the 1980s, all fueled by a government that wanted to dismantle or weaken Black unity. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, viewed these movements as radical and potentially subversive. COINTELPRO was designed to neutralize what Hoover considered to be threats to national security and societal stability. Black power movements and Black leaders were systemically busted out and destroyed from within, the divider being religion greater than race. It is only through racial unity and racial cohesion that we can revitalize, improve, and empower Black America. It's just like when you've got some coffee that's too black, which means it's too strong. What do? You integrate it with cream, you make it weak. But if you pour too much cream in it, you won't even know you ever had coffee. It used to be hot, it becomes cool. It used to be strong, it becomes weak. It used to wake you up, now it puts you to sleep. Malcolm X. The ongoing culture war within Black America has been a decades-long struggle, shaped by various ideologies and social dynamics, including double consciousness, individualism, and collectivism. The Black bourgeoisie, or Black elites, commodify Blackness and Black culture for cannibalistic consumption via media representation by playing up to the caricatures or archetypes developed in the socio-religious mythos of white supremacy. This internal conflict is marked by distinct factions within the Black community. On one side, there is the street hood and ratchet culture, which is often characterized by a focus on survival, entertainment, and tribalism. This culture embodies the raw, unfiltered experiences of Black life, In environments heavily affected by racial occupation, where social mobility is pursued through avenues like trade jobs, blue-collar jobs, school, art, hustles, illegal activity, music, sports, and other entertainment industries. On the opposite end, the Black elite, the Black bourgeoisie, and the Black pseudo-intellectuals strive for social mobility through education and integration into mainstream, predominantly white, society. These individuals may commodify Blackness to appeal to wider audiences, sometimes perpetuating stereotypes and archetypes for commercial gain. Their Blackness can appear cosmetic, masking their full integration and socialization within the norms of WASP culture. The conscious and Pan-African segment emphasizes socio-political activism, education, and a return to African roots, advocating for collective upliftment, self-reliance, and a strong connection to African heritage. This group often clashes with the elite and bourgeoisie for what they perceive as a betrayal of Black culture and values. All of these forces have created a complex landscape for Black people to navigate while finding ways to thrive despite obstacles. Education and integration focus on achieving success through academic and professional accomplishments, balancing Black identity with conforming to dominant cultural norms. Socio-political activism underscores the importance of advocacy and activism in addressing systemic racism and inequality, involving grassroots movements, political engagement, and efforts to bring about social change. The sexual liberation movement and feminism explore issues of sexual racism and the intersection of race and gender, including the struggle for gender equality within the Black community and the broader societal context. Classism, racism, and sexism are interconnected social issues that impact the Black social consciousness, with the internal culture war navigating these dynamics while striving for progress and unity. The destruction of Black civilization and nation building highlight the importance of Black women and the family nuclear structure, calling for a return to foundational values to restore and empower Black communities. As Black culture gains popularity, there is a noticeable trend of backtracking among those who previously distanced themselves from their Black identity. Their Blackness becomes cosmetic, masking their full integration and socialization into WASP culture. It is a facade, neo-Blackness, in which it is the Black elites redefining it. The culture war within Black America is complex, involving various ideological battles over identity, representation, and the path to restoration and empowerment, even on the individual and collective spectrum. Addressing these issues requires a nuanced understanding of the historical and social contexts that has shaped them, which can be found in the Black American experiences while under racial occupation.